It was a cold, wet evening in Seattle, the kind that made the entire city look silver under the rain. Melissa Carter had just finished setting the dinner table for two. The candles flickered softly, and the smell of roasted vegetables filled the quiet apartment. It was one of those rare nights she'd managed to get home before her husband, Eric, hoping they could finally eat together, talk, and maybe feel close again lately. She'd felt something fading, not loudly, but quietly, like a light dimming over time. They still talked, still smiled, still acted like everything was fine. But somewhere between his long work hours and her growing loneliness, the rhythm of their marriage had changed. Melissa checked the clock. 7:20 p.m., he was late again. She sighed and turned off the stove, folding her arms as thunder rolled outside. Just as she began to blow out the candles, she heard the sound of keys at the door. Finally, she murmured, but her relief vanished the moment the door opened. Eric stepped in, soaked from the rain. Behind him were 5 strangers, 3 men and 2 women, shivering, wet and looking completely out of place in her warm, tidy home. "Melissa," Eric said breathlessly, shaking off his coat. "Please don't panic. These people, they had nowhere to go. The shelters downtown are full and the weather's awful. I couldn't just leave them there." Melissa blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. "You brought 5 people here to stay. They'll just dry off, eat something, and go in the morning," he promised, smiling as if it were a simple favor. The stranger stood awkwardly in the doorway, a tall man with a beard, a young woman clutching a worn backpack, an older lady, and to others who avoided eye contact, their clothes were damp, their shoes leaving muddy prints on the rug. Melissa forced a polite smile. Of course. Come in, inside, her living room filled with the sounds of gratitude. "Thank you. God bless you. You're angels." She nodded, trying to stay composed while her mind spun. Eric had always been the type to help others. But this? This crossed a line she hadn't known existed. She went to grab towels and blankets, her hands trembling slightly. In the kitchen, she muttered to herself, "What is he thinking?" But when she returned, Eric was already talking to them, his face bright with a warmth she hadn't seen in months. "This is my wife, Melissa," he said proudly. "She's the real heart of this home." The group smiled, thanking her again. She smiled back, though inside a quiet unease settled in her chest. An hour later, the one-scum apartment was buzzing with noise. Eric handed out soup, told stories, laughed freely. Melissa sat at the edge of the couch, pretending to read messages on her phone. She watched her husband's face light up as he spoke to Daisy, the youngest woman, with tired but kind eyes and a soft smile that seemed to comfort everyone around her. Something about the way he looked at Daisy made Melissa pause. It wasn't romantic, at least not obviously, but it was gentle, almost protective. When Daisy thanked him for the 3rd time, saying, "You've done more for me than anyone in years," Eric smiled like it meant something deeper. Melissa turned her eyes away. By 10 o'clock, everyone was settled, the guests asleep on couches and mats. Eric stood by the window, watching the rain. Melissa joined him quietly. "They seem nice," she said carefully. "They are," he replied. "Just people who've had bad luck. You'd be surprised how fast life can turn like that." "I'm not," she said softly, her voice tinged with something heavier. He looked at her, puzzled. "You're upset. Kai Tarek. You brought strangers into our home without even asking me." He frowned slightly. "It was an emergency." "I know." But she hesitated. "It's not just that. It's everything lately. You keep giving so much of yourself to everyone else. Do you ever save any of it for me?" Eric sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're my wife. You have all of me." But his eyes drifted toward the living room again, where Daisy lay sleeping near the fireplace, her face peaceful under the flickering light. Melissa noticed. She didn't say anything, but she felt something tighten deep in her chest, a quiet, wordless ache. The next morning she woke early and found Eric in the kitchen making coffee for everyone. He looked energized, almost joyful. He handed Daisy a cup with a smile. "Thanks. Daisy said softly. You remind me of my brother. He used to look out for me like this. Melissa froze for a second, watching from the hallway. It wasn't what they said, it was the comfort between them. The kind that forms too quickly, the kind that doesn't belong in a married home. She stepped forward. Morning, she said, forcing cheerfulness. Daisy smiled shyly. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you again for letting us stay. Melissa returned the smile but felt invisible. Like she was standing in her own house as a guest. The group stayed another night, then another. Every evening, Eric cooked, talked, laughed. The apartment that once felt like hers was now a place filled with others' voices and stories. Melissa tried to be kind. But inside, she grew quieter. She missed their dinners, their private jokes, the silence that used to be comfortable. Now, even their bedroom felt distant. Eric often fell asleep early, exhausted from helping everyone else. On the fifth night, she found him in the living room again, talking softly with Daisy while the others slept. They were sitting close, heads bowed, their voices low. When he noticed her, he stood quickly. Hey, you're still up? I couldn't sleep, she said flatly. Apparently, neither could you. He looked guilty for a second, then said she just needed someone to talk to. She's been through a lot. Melissa nodded, forcing a calm she didn't feel. Of course. That night, when she finally lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling and whispered, What are you doing to us, Eric? A few days later, the 5 guests left, thanking them again, promising to stay in touch. Daisy hugged Eric before leaving. Melissa noticed he hesitated for half a second before letting go. When the door finally closed, the silence returned. It should have felt like peace. Instead, it felt hollow. Eric sat down with a sigh. I think we did a good thing. Melissa didn't answer right away. She looked around at the muddy footprints that were still there, at the leftover blankets, at the empty couch where strangers had slept. Then she said quietly, You helped them, Eric, but I think you forgot about me. He frowned. That's not fair. She met his eyes. Maybe not, but it's true. He didn't argue. He just looked away, and that silence between them, the one that used to feel comfortable, now felt unbearable for the next week. Melissa tried to move on. She worked longer hours, met friends, filled her time so she wouldn't have to face how distant her marriage had become. Eric went back to his job, and though he acted normal, he seemed restless, distracted, like part of him was somewhere else. Then, one rainy evening, just like the first night, the doorbell rang. Melissa went to answer it, expecting a delivery. But when she opened the door, Daisy was standing there again alone, soaked, clutching a torn backpack. Melissa, Daisy's voice trembled. I didn't know where else to go. Before Melissa could answer, Eric appeared behind her, surprised but not shocked. Daisy? What happened? Daisy's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I just needed help. I lost my job. I don't have anywhere else. Melissa looked between them, Eric's concerned face, Daisy's pleading eyes, and in that moment, she understood that the story wasn't over. Not even close. The second time Daisy entered Melissa's home, everything felt different. The rain poured outside just like before, but this time, it wasn't about helping strangers. It was about testing boundaries. Melissa stood frozen at the door, her fingers gripping the handle as Daisy explained her situation. Her job at a coffee shop had ended, her landlord had locked her out, and she had no family nearby. Every word sounded desperate but genuine. Eric's face softened immediately. You can stay here for a few days until you figure things out, he said. Before Melissa could even respond, Melissa's heart sank. Eric, but Daisy interrupted gently. I don't want to be a burden. Just a few days. I'll help around the house. Melissa hesitated. Saying no would make her look cruel, unkind, and Eric's pleading eyes didn't help. So she stepped aside and said, Fine, just a few days. Daisy smiled faintly. Thank you, Melissa. I'll never forget this. But as Melissa closed the door behind them, a quiet voice inside her whispered, You're making a mistake. That night, The house felt alive again, but not in the warm, comforting way it used to. Daisy helped in the kitchen, washing dishes beside Eric, their laughter echoing through the space. Melissa sat at the dining table, pretending to scroll her phone while her stomach twisted. She caught small moments. The way Daisy tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed. The way Eric's voice softened when he spoke to her. None of it was openly wrong, but together it felt too close. Later, as they cleaned up, Melissa said quietly, "You didn't ask me before inviting her again." Eric sighed, drying his hands. "What was I supposed to do? Leave her in the rain?" "No," she said. "But you could have talked to me first. This is our home." He nodded, avoiding her gaze. "You're right. I just acted fast. I didn't think." That was exactly what scared her. He hadn't thought. Over the next few days, Daisy settled in. She helped with chores, cooked simple meals, and even played with the neighbors' kids outside. Everyone seemed to like her, everyone except Melissa. It wasn't that she hated Daisy, it was that Daisy reminded her of something she'd lost. Warmth, connection, joy, all the things her marriage used to have. Melissa noticed how Eric began coming home earlier again. Something he hadn't done in months. He'd walk in, see Daisy, and suddenly have energy to talk, laugh, and share stories. Melissa, meanwhile, became quieter. One night after dinner, she found Eric fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen while Daisy watched, offering to hold the flashlight. Melissa stood in the doorway, listening to their soft laughter, feeling like an outsider in her own marriage. When Daisy went to bed, Melissa finally said, "You've been spending a lot of time with her." Eric frowned, confused. "She's here. I'm just being polite." Polite. Melissa's voice was calm, but sharp. "Eric, you barely talk to me like that anymore?" He looked tired. "You're overthinking this?" She crossed her arms. Maybe I'm the only one still thinking at all." The silence that followed said everything neither wanted to admit. Days passed. Daisy found part-time work nearby, but she didn't move out. She kept saying she was saving up for a small place, and Eric kept saying, "Take your time." Melissa began to notice smaller, quieter details, the way Daisy's coffee mug always sat beside Eric's in the morning. The way her laughter seemed to echo longer when he was around. One afternoon, while cleaning, Melissa found a note in the kitchen drawer, a small thank you card written in Daisy's delicate handwriting. "You've shown me kindness when I had no one. I hope someday I can repay that." It was addressed to Eric, not to them both. Melissa folded the note and placed it back without a word. But that night, her chest felt heavy with something she hadn't felt in years. Jealousy mixed with fear. A week later, Eric invited Daisy to join them for a community dinner. Melissa went along, trying to stay civil. But during the dinner, she noticed people looking at the three of them, her, Eric, and Daisy, and whispering afterward as they walked home. She asked quietly, "Do you realize how this looks?" Eric frowned. "How what looks?" "You and Daisy," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "People notice things. They talk. You stopped walking. Melissa, she's a friend. That's all." "Friends don't stay this long," she said softly. He didn't answer. The rest of the walk was silent. The next morning, Melissa woke up early and found Eric already gone. On the counter was a note. "Took Daisy to a job interview. Back soon." She sat down, staring at the words. Her husband hadn't written her a note in months, and now his small gestures of care were being spent on someone else. That afternoon, she tried to distract herself with work. But when she came home, she found Eric and Daisy sitting on the couch celebrating. Daisy had gotten the job. They looked happy, their laughter filling the room. Melissa stood there for a moment before saying, "Congratulations." Her voice came out colder than she intended. Daisy smiled shyly. "Thank you, Melissa. You've both done so much for me." Melissa nodded, but her heart felt hollow. Later that night, she asked Eric, "Are you even aware of how distant we've become?" He sighed. "You keep saying that, but you're the one pulling away." She stared at him. "I'm trying to hold on. You're the one drifting." Their eyes met, tired, sad, but stubbornly proud. Neither wanted to admit defeat. 2 days later, things changed. Melissa came home earlier than usual and found Daisy sitting alone at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. "Daisy, what's wrong?" she asked gently. Daisy looked up, embarrassed. "It's nothing. I just miss my family." Melissa hesitated before sitting down beside her. "You've been through a lot, but you'll get through this." For the first time, they talked, really talked. Daisy shared stories of her childhood, of losing her parents young, of bouncing from one temporary job to another. By the end of the conversation, Melissa felt something shift inside her. Daisy wasn't a threat, she was just lost. But just as Melissa was beginning to soften, Eric came home. He saw them together, smiled warmly, and said, "I told you, she's amazing." Daisy blushed. Melissa froze. Something about his tone, proud, familiar, broke the fragile peace that had begun forming. That night, Melissa couldn't sleep. She went to the living room for water and saw light coming from under the kitchen door. Quietly, she peeked in. Eric and Daisy were sitting there again, talking softly. Daisy was crying again, and Eric was comforting her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice low. It wasn't wrong, but it was too close. Melissa stepped back, heart pounding, and went to bed without saying a word. She didn't need to see more. She already knew. The next morning, she said calmly over breakfast, "Daisy, you've been here for a while now. Maybe it's time you move into your new place." Daisy looked startled. Yes, I found a small studio near my job. I was going to move next week." Eric frowned. Why rush her? Melissa met his eyes, steady but firm. "Because I need my home back." There was silence. Then Daisy nodded. "She's right. I'll move out tomorrow." Melissa smiled politely. "Good." That evening, as Daisy packed her things, the air in the house felt heavy. Eric helped her carry boxes to the car. When she hugged him goodbye, Melissa watched from the doorway, no anger this time. Just quiet understanding. When the car finally drove away, Melissa turned to Eric. "So," she said softly, "is our kindness finally done?" He looked at her, tired but remorseful. "I didn't mean for it to hurt you." "It's not about meaning to," she replied. "It's about forgetting who you're supposed to care for first." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "We need to talk," she said, "but not tonight." And she walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, rain tapping softly against the window once more. After Daisy left, silence settled over the Carter home. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy, uncomfortable kind that fills every corner when words are being avoided. Melissa moved through the days like a ghost. She cooked, worked, smiled at neighbors, but inside she was drifting. She missed the life she used to have with Eric, the laughter, the small touches, the feeling of being seen. Now they spoke only about bills, chores, or the weather. Nothing real. Eric tried to act as if things were fine. He came home on time, offered to help with dinner, even watched movies beside her, but the distance between them was obvious. Every time he reached for her hand, she hesitated. Every time he smiled. She wondered if he was remembering Daisy instead. The uncertainty ate at her more than the jealousy ever did. One evening, about 2 weeks after Daisy had moved out, Melissa came home to find Eric sitting at the dining table staring at his phone. His expression was tense. "Everything okay?" she asked cautiously. He looked up, startled. "Yeah, just tired." But his voice was off. He quickly locked the screen and shoved the phone aside. Melissa didn't press, not yet. But later that night, when he fell asleep, she noticed his phone lighting up again on the nightstand. A message flashed briefly before disappearing. "Thank you for helping me. I owe you so much, Daisy." Melissa's breath caught. It wasn't a romantic message, but the name alone reopened every wound she'd been trying to close. She didn't touch the phone. She just turned away and whispered to herself, "So it's still not over." The next morning she acted normal. Made coffee, smiled faintly, asked about his day. Eric noticed her quietness but said nothing. Later, while doing laundry, Melissa found a small envelope tucked into the pocket of Eric's jeans. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a check. It was made out to Daisy. The note attached said, just to help you get started. Don't tell Melissa, she worries too much." Melissa's hands shook. She sank to the floor, the paper trembling in her grip. It wasn't about money. It was about trust, and he'd broken it again. That night, when Eric came home, she was waiting in the living room. The check lay on the coffee table. He froze when he saw it. "Want to explain?" She asked quietly. He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Her voice cracked slightly. "You told her not to tell me?" "Why, Eric?" He sighed. "Because I knew you'd react like this." She needed help. "She's starting over. She's starting over," Melissa repeated, anger flashing in her eyes. "What about us, Eric? When do we start over?" He looked at her, guilt written all over his face. "Melissa, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just wanted to help her get back on her feet." "You keep saying that," she said, her voice trembling. "But every time you help someone else, you lose a piece of me." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside tapped against the windows again. Always the rain. As if the universe wanted to remind her where it all began. Finally, she said, "I don't know who you are anymore." She walked away. Leaving him standing in silence, the next morning, she packed a small suitcase. "I need space," she said simply. Eric didn't argue. He looked defeated, his voice small. "Where will you go?" "Back to my sister's for a while." He nodded slowly. "Melissa, I never don't," she said, cutting him off gently. "It's just don't." She left that morning, tears burning her eyes, but her heart strangely calm. Sometimes distance wasn't about leaving someone behind. It was about finding yourself again at her sister's house. Melissa felt something she hadn't felt in years. Quiet clarity. She walked red and wrote in a small notebook, trying to make sense of everything. One evening, her sister, Nora, sat beside her on the porch. "You still love him, don't you?" Melissa nodded slowly. "I do. But I don't trust him anymore. And love without trust feels like standing on air." Nora squeezed her hand. "Then maybe it's time he earns it back, not with words, but with actions." Melissa thought about that long after Nora went to bed. Maybe she wasn't done with her marriage yet. Maybe there was still something worth saving. He truly wanted to save it. 2 weeks passed before Eric showed up at Nora's door. He looked tired, his eyes heavy with regret. He held a small envelope in his hand. "Can I talk to her?" he asked quietly. Melissa came out cautious, but calm. "Why are you here?" He handed her the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, simple. "I didn't love Daisy. I never did. I helped her because I saw a part of myself in her, lost, searching for purpose. But I forgot that my real purpose has always been you. I understand if you can't forgive me right now. But I'll spend the rest of my days proving I never meant to betray you. Not through words, through change." She looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You should have told me the truth from the start." "Scared," he admitted. "Not of you, but of losing the person who still makes me feel like I matter." There was silence between them, heavy, but not cold this time. Slowly, she nodded. "If you want to fix this, Eric, start by listening." Over the next few weeks, they met often in parks, coffee shops, anywhere that didn't hold the weight of their old memories. They talked honestly for the first time in years. Melissa told him about the loneliness she'd felt long before Daisy ever arrived. Eric listened, really listened, realizing that his endless kindness toward strangers had slowly replaced the attention his wife once needed. He began making small changes, volunteering less, spending more evenings at home, cooking dinner, asking her about her day, not just out of habit, but out of genuine care. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Months later, Melissa returned home. Not to the same life, but to a new chapter. The house looked the same, yet everything felt different. Eric greeted her with a nervous smile. "I made dinner. Just for us." They sat together, the air soft, the tension gone. After dinner, he handed her another envelope. Inside was a note. "I donated to the shelter in Daisy's name. She got her own apartment now. She sent a thank you letter to both of us." Melissa smiled faintly. To both of us. He nodded. I told her I couldn't do anything behind your back again. Not ever. For the first time in a long while. Melissa felt peace. Later that night, they stood by the window, watching the rain fall, the same rain that once brought 5 strangers into their lives. It nearly tore them apart. Melissa rested her head on his shoulder. You think people can really change? Eric placed his hand over hers. Only if they realize who they almost lost. She looked up at him, eyes soft. Then I hope you never forget. I won't, he said quietly. And for the first time in months. She believed him. In the weeks that followed, Melissa started writing again, short essays about forgiveness, trust, and rebuilding love. One of them she titled The Strangers Who Saved My Marriage, 'cause, in the end, that's what happened. Those strangers and the one woman who tested their limits had forced both of them to look inward, to face what was broken, and to decide if it was still worth mending. And it was. Final scene a year later. Melissa and Eric hosted a small dinner at their home for the first time since everything happened. The table was set beautifully. Laughter filled the room, and this time, the guests weren't strangers, they were friends they'd made together as Melissa watched. Eric talking and laughing beside her. She realized something important. Healing hadn't come from forgetting the pain. It had come from learning through it. Love wasn't about perfection. It was about rebuilding trust when it had every reason to break. And for Melissa, that made it even more real. Rain hit the city like silver needles that night, turning the streets of Chicago into mirrors of light. Inside the 32nd floor of Horizon Tower, Clara Beaumont, 35, the youngest female CEO in her company's history, was still working. Her office lights glowed against the dark skyline. 3 weeks ago, her life had changed completely. A car accident had left her with a broken leg and a long scar down her thigh. Since then, walking was a struggle, and she relied on crutches to move around. For someone like Clara, always strong, composed, and in control, that injury wasn't just physical. It had taken a piece of her confidence, too. She stared at her computer screen, her leg propped up, exhaustion clouding her mind. The building was nearly empty. Everyone had gone home before the storm began. She liked it this way, quiet. No one watching her struggle to move. But when the thunder rolled across the city and the lights flickered, her calm broke. The office went dark. Clara froze. The hum of machines stopped and her heart began to race. She reached for her phone, dead battery. She muttered under her breath, perfect timing. Then, from the hallway, came footsteps. Slow, echoing, hello, she called out. Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. No reply. The steps grew closer. Her pulse quickened. She couldn't even stand properly without her crutch. And the thought of being trapped in the dark office made her chest tighten. Who's there? She said again, trying to sound firm. A figure appeared at her doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, a faint outline against the dim city lights. Please don't hurt me, she blurted out. I can't walk. The man stopped immediately. His voice came low and steady. Ma'am, it's okay. I work here. I'm the maintenance guy. Name's Jack Harper. Clara exhaled in relief. Maintenance. He nodded and stepped closer, careful not to alarm her. Power went out across 3 floors. I'm here to check the wiring. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a warm glow on his face. He looked about mid-30s, rainwater dripping from his jacket, with kind brown eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that came from living through hard days. She felt foolish for being afraid, but the fear still lingered in her voice. I didn't expect anyone else to be here this late. Jack smiled faintly. I could say the same to you, ma'am. But I guess CEOs don't have a clock-out time. That earned a weak laugh from her. Apparently not. He set down his toolbox and moved toward the circuit panel by her window. You should sit tight. I'll have the power running in a few minutes. Ah! She watched him work in silence. He moved with precision, checking wires, tightening bolts, occasionally glancing up to make sure she was okay. He wasn't like the people she met in boardrooms. No arrogance, no rush. Just steady hands and quiet focus. When the lights came back, The entire floor glowed again. Jack turned to her. "They're good as new." Clara smiled. "Thank you. You just saved my night." "Glad to help," he said simply. Then, noticing her struggle to stand, he stepped forward. "Here, let me." She tried to wave him off. "No, I've got it," but as soon as she stood, her leg trembled, and she stumbled slightly. Jack caught her arm, steadying her gently. "Easy," he said, his tone calm and respectful. "You shouldn't put too much weight on it." Clara's cheeks flushed, more from frustration than embarrassment. "I hate this. I hate needing help." He smiled softly. "Everyone needs help sometimes, even CEOs." That made her really laugh for the first time since the accident. She eased back into her chair, studying him. His jacket was soaked, his hands rough, but his eyes were kind. "Do you always work this late?" she asked. He shrugged. "When storms hit, yeah. Power lines don't care about my schedule. And your family. They don't mind." His expression softened. "It's just me and my daughter. She's 9. She'd probably be up watching cartoons right now." Clara leaned back, intrigued. "What's her name?" "Sophie. She's smart, stubborn, and already better at bossing me around than my old supervisor ever was." Clara smiled, picturing it. "She sounds like a handful." "She is," he said, laughing quietly. "But she's the best part of my day." It's the way he said it, not casually, but with warmth, struck something inside Clara. It had been so long since she'd heard someone speak about family with love instead of obligation. Minutes passed easily between them. They talked about the storm, the city, little pieces of their lives. He told her how his wife had passed away years ago, and how he'd been raising Sophie alone. "I'm not perfect at it," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "But she tells me I make good pancakes, so I guess I'm doing okay." Clara found herself smiling again. "You sound like a good dad." He looked down, almost shy, trying to be. The building creaked as thunder rolled again. She glanced toward the window. "Looks like the storm isn't done yet." "No," he said. "And if it gets worse, the streets will flood. You might be stuck here a while." "It's fine," she replied. "I've got reports to finish anyway." Jack looked at her leg and frowned. "You should be resting, not working." She smirked. "That's easy to say when you're not responsible for 200 employees." He chuckled. "Fair enough." When she tried to move her crutch again, he noticed her wince. "Does it still hurt a lot?" She nodded. "Every step reminds me I'm not invincible anymore." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," he said quietly. She looked at him. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Sometimes we move so fast trying to be strong that we forget we're still human. Slowing down doesn't mean giving up." Clara was silent. No one had spoken to her like that before. Not an employee, not even friends. Most people were careful around her, intimidated by her title. Jack talked to her like he saw past it. It stirred something unexpected inside her, a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. After a while, he checked the last panel and packed up his tools. Power should stay stable now. "Thank you, Jack." "Really?" she said. "You didn't have to stay this long." He shrugged. "Can't leave someone stranded in the dark. My daughter would scold me for that." Clara smiled. "You sound like you raised her right." He laughed softly. "I'm trying. Maybe she's the one raising me." As he turned to leave, she hesitated. Something in her chest didn't want him to go. The room felt lighter with him there, calmer. "Jack," she called out before he reached the door. He turned back. My apartment's in the same building. The wiring there has been acting strange since the accident. Would you mind checking it tomorrow?" He smiled, a small, kind smile that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. "Sure, tomorrow after work. I'll bring coffee. Black, or do you take cream?" "Black," she said quickly, smiling back. "Thanks. See you then," he said, and with that, he disappeared down the hall. The office fell quiet again, but the silence felt different. Softer somehow. Clara leaned back, staring out the window as the rain slowed. Her heart was still unsteady, but not from fear this time. For the first time since her accident, she didn't feel alone. She didn't know much about Jack Harper except that he was kind, patient, and very real in a world that often wasn't. And deep down, she felt that the man who walked into her office that stormy night hadn't just fixed the lights. He had unknowingly repaired something far more fragile, the part of her that had forgotten how to feel again. The next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving Chicago washed clean and bright. The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Horizon Tower. But Clara's mind was still replaying the night before, the way Jack had spoken to her with warmth and honesty, without fear of her title or status, for the first time in months. She had slept without waking from pain or worry. There was something about his presence, quiet, grounded, real, that stayed with her. By the time she reached her apartment later that afternoon, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number read, "Jack Harper here. Just finishing up at the tower. Still okay if I come by to check the wiring?" Clara smiled at the text before replying. "Yes. Come any time after 6. At exactly 6:05, a soft knock echoed at her door. She opened it to find him standing there, same calm smile, toolbox in hand. His shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Evening, Ms. Beaumont," he said politely. "Clara," she corrected gently. "If you're going to fix my place, at least call me by my name." He chuckled. "All right, Clara, it is." Her apartment was modern, spotless, and quiet. Too quiet. He noticed the crutches leaning against the wall, the untouched piano near the window, and a stack of unopened letters on the counter. "You live alone?" he asked while kneeling near the electrical panel. "Yes, always have," she said. "Company feels complicated." "Sometimes," he replied, testing the wires. "But sometimes company's what keeps you from falling apart." She looked at him curiously. "Is that how it was for you and Sophie?" He smiled softly. "Yeah. After her mom passed, I thought I had to be strong for her. But I learned something. Sometimes strength is letting someone see when you're not okay." That line lingered in her mind long after he said it. Jack moved around her apartment, checking outlets and fixtures. His movements were efficient but gentle, never intrusive. Clara followed him, trying not to stare but unable to help it. There was something comforting about him, the kind of comfort that didn't need words. When he finished, he turned to her. "You've got an old breaker. I'll need to replace it, but it'll take a few days to order the part." "No rush," she said, smiling. "Honestly, I don't mind if you have to come back." He caught the teasing tone in her voice and smiled too. "I'll take that as a compliment." Before leaving, he noticed her trying to reach something on the top shelf of her kitchen. Without a word, he stepped forward, grabbed the jar, and placed it on the counter. "Thanks," she said, embarrassed. "I'm not used to being limited." He leaned on the counter. "You'll walk again, Clara. Just give it time." She nodded quietly, her eyes softening. "You sound so sure. I've seen people come back from worse. You've got the kind of will most people would break under." For a moment, the air between them shifted. Not romantic, not yet, but deeply human. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to believe in her again. He packed up his tools and paused at the door. "By the way, Sophie's been asking why I was fixing wires at midnight. I told her I was helping someone important." Clara smiled. "Tell her I said thank you for lending her dad." That made him laugh. "I'll tell her." She liked that. When he left, the apartment felt emptier than before. Clara sat by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker below, thinking about the man who treated her not like a CEO, not like a patient, but like a person. Over the next few weeks, Jack came by often, sometimes to check the wiring, sometimes to drop off coffee, and sometimes just because Sophie had baked too many cookies. Each visit became something Clara quietly looked forward to. He'd tell stories about Sophie, how she wanted to become an astronaut, how she'd built a cardboard spaceship in their living room, how she made him wear a tinfoil helmet for safety. Clara laughed more in those moments than she had in months. Sometimes. She'd share stories, too, about her early days struggling to build her company, about how success had come with a cost she hadn't seen coming. Loneliness. Jack listened without judgment. He didn't try to fix her problems, just heard them. One evening, as he replaced the breaker box, Sophie appeared at the door with a small pink umbrella in hand. "Dad," she called, "you forgot your lunchbox again?" Clara smiled as Jack laughed. "Sophie, I told you not to run in the rain." Sophie looked up at Clara shyly. "Hi, you're the lady who can't walk good yet, right?" Clara laughed softly. "That's me." Sophie tilted her head. "You'll get better. My dad says strong people always do." "Oh, no." Jack groaned. "She overhears everything." Clara smiled warmly. "Well, your dad's right." Sophie looked proud. "He usually is." That moment melted something in Clara's heart. She hadn't realized how long it had been since laughter filled her home. After Sophie left, Clara turned to Jack. "She's amazing. You must be proud." "I am," he said, his eyes softening. "She keeps me grounded. I think she's the reason I still know how to smile." Clara's expression grew tender. "I envy that. Having someone who makes life simpler." He shook his head. "It's not simpler, just more meaningful." She looked at him quietly, understanding more in that single sentence than she could have through 100 board meetings. Weeks turned into months. Her legs slowly healed. With therapy, she began walking short distances again. Jack kept visiting, helping when she needed it, cheering when she took her first steps without crutches. "You did it," he said one morning, his voice full of pride. "I did," she said, tears of relief welling in her eyes. "But I couldn't have without your help." He shook his head. "You would have done it either way. I just reminded you you're not alone." She looked at him, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. There were moments, short, fleeting ones, where their eyes met a little too long, where silence carried meaning that neither dared to voice. Still, neither crossed the line. She was still healing, not just her leg, but her trust. And Jack respected that one Friday evening after another long day at work. Clara stopped by Jack's maintenance office to drop off some papers he had left upstairs. He wasn't there, but Sophie was sitting on a stool, coloring. "Hi, Sophie," Clara said gently. "Is your dad around?" Sophie shook her head. "He went to fix the elevator. He'll be back soon." Clara sat down beside her. "What are you drawing?" Sophie grinned and turned the paper around. "It's you, my dad, and me on the beach. You're walking without your crutch." Clara's throat tightened. "That's beautiful." Sophie nodded proudly. "Dad said when you get better, you should come to the lake with us this summer. We make sandcastles." Clara smiled through a sudden rush of emotion. "I'd like that very much." Just then, Jack returned, surprised to find her there. "Clara, everything okay?" She smiled softly. "Just came to deliver this. And to thank your assistant here for the best drawing I've seen in years." Jack smiled, then looked at his daughter. "Sophie, maybe you should frame that one." As the three of them stood there, one man, one woman, and one bright child between them, something unspoken filled the air. It wasn't love yet, not in the romantic sense. But it was connection, raw, genuine, and rare. Clara left soon after, but as she walked away, she realized her limp felt lighter, her heart steadier. Maybe recovery wasn't just about healing her leg. Maybe it was about rediscovering the parts of herself she'd buried, the parts that still believed in kindness, family, and second chances. And though neither of them said it aloud, both Jack and Clara knew their story was far from over. Winter had melted into spring, and for the first time in a long while, Clara Beaumont could walk without her cane. The air felt softer, lighter, almost like the city itself had shifted. She stood outside her office window, watching the river glisten under the afternoon sun. Life at Horizon Tower had returned to its normal rhythm: meetings, reports, numbers. But something inside her had changed. Jack Harper had become a part of her life in quiet ways. He still worked in the building as a maintenance supervisor, but lately their worlds kept finding excuses to meet. A flickering hallway light, a delivery mix-up, a broken heater, and somehow his name always came up. But it wasn't the excuses that made her heart flutter anymore. It was the comfort she felt when he was near, the sense that, for once, someone saw her, not the CEO, not the woman who had once begged through pain. but the person beneath the title that afternoon as she packed up her papers. Her phone buzzed with a message. Jack, Lake Michigan's calm today. Sophie and I are going for a walk. You're welcome to join. For a moment, she hesitated. She hadn't gone out just for herself in months. But something in that message, the easy warmth of it, made her want to try. Clara, give me 30 minutes. I'll be there. By the time she arrived at the lakeshore, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of gold and pink. Jack was there, tossing a pebble across the water with Sophie, who laughed as it skipped. When Clara approached, Sophie waved excitedly. You came. I promised I'd see that sandcastle, didn't I? Clara said, smiling. Sophie grinned. Then let's make one big enough to keep seagulls out. Jack chuckled. That's ambitious, kiddo. As they began shaping wet sand, Clara found herself laughing, really laughing, the kind that made her cheeks ache. Her expensive shoes were caked with sand, her hair whipped by the wind. But she didn't care. When Sophie ran off to collect seashells, Jack turned to her. You look happy. I am, she said quietly. I forgot what that felt like. He watched her for a moment. You've come a long way, Clara. From the night I met you, scared and hurting, to this, you're standing strong. She smiled softly. You helped me remember how. There was a pause between them, gentle, unspoken. Then she asked, Do you ever miss your wife? He nodded slowly. Every day. But I've learned missing someone doesn't mean life stops. It means you carry what they gave you and you try to give it forward. That's beautiful, she said. He shrugged, smiling. Maybe, or maybe it's just how I survive. Their eyes met. And for a heartbeat, the world went quiet, no wind. Number waves, no noise, just two people, both broken in different ways, finding something that felt whole between them. The days that followed became a blur of small, meaningful moments. Coffee shared in the lobby. Lunch breaks in the park. Simple texts that said, You okay? And don't forget to eat. They never labeled what they had. It wasn't a romance yet, but it wasn't just friendship either. It was a connection that didn't need definition. It just was. One evening, Clara invited them both to her apartment for dinner as a thank you for everything they'd done. Jack tried to refuse, but Sophie insisted. You said good people say thank you properly, Dad. Let's go. That night, her apartment glowed with laughter and warmth. Sophie spilled juice on the table. Jack burned the garlic bread. And Clara, for the first time in her life, didn't care that things weren't perfect. After Sophie went to the balcony to look at the city lights, Jack turned to Clara. You've built something amazing here. Not just this place, your company, your life. Clara looked around the elegant room, then back at him. It's strange. I've built everything I thought I wanted, and yet it never felt this full until now. He smiled gently. Sometimes it's not what we build, it's who we build it with. Something shifted inside her then, something quiet and powerful. She had spent years proving she could stand on her own. But maybe, just maybe, strength could also mean letting someone stand beside you. Weeks later, Clara surprised Sophie at school with a visit. She brought flowers for her art teacher and stayed for the class exhibition. Sophie's drawing caught her attention immediately. A picture of a woman walking beside a man and a little girl. Underneath it, the words, People who fix each other's broken parts. Clara's heart clenched. When Jack arrived later, he saw her standing there, emotional. She drew us, Clara whispered. All three of us. Jack looked at the picture and smiled. Looks like she sees something we're too careful to say. Clara looked up at him. And what if she's right? He took a slow breath. Then maybe it's time we stop being careful. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was warm, deep, and full of meaning. That weekend, they drove out to a quiet park on the edge of the city. The spring air carried the scent of fresh grass and blooming lilacs. Sophie ran ahead, chasing butterflies while Jack and Clara walked behind her. I used to think love was weakness, Clara said quietly. That it distracted you, made you soft. And now? He asked. Now I think it's the only thing that makes people stronger. Jack smiled. You sound like someone who's figured out what she wants. She stopped walking, turning to face him. I think I have. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached for his hand, hesitant at first, then firm. Jack looked down at her hand in his, then back into her eyes. You sure about this, Clara? She nodded, her voice steady. For the first time, yes. He smiled, that simple, genuine smile that had disarmed her since the day they met. Then, I guess this is where our story really begins. Sophie's voice echoed from the distance. Dad. Clara, look. 2 ducks. They both laughed, the tension breaking, the world suddenly lighter. They walked forward hand in hand, catching up with her, the 3 of them silhouetted against the soft golden sky. Months passed. Life didn't become perfect, it became real. Clara continued leading her company, but she no longer worked until midnight. Jack still fixed things around the building, though now Clara often found excuses to check on maintenance. They spent weekends at the park, picnics by the lake, movie nights where Sophie would always fall asleep halfway through. Sometimes, Clara would look at them this simple, small family she had stumbled into and wonder how she had ever lived without it. One evening, as they sat watching a summer storm through the window, Clara whispered, Do you remember the night we met? Jack smiled. Hard to forget. You looked ready to fire me. She laughed softly. And you looked like someone who didn't care who I was. I didn't, he said honestly. I just cared that you were okay. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You fixed more than wires that night, Jack, he smiled, wrapping an arm around her. And you fixed more than you know. Sighed. Thunder rolled across the sky, but inside, everything was calm, the kind of calm that comes when broken souls find the courage to heal together. A year later, Clara stood on a small pier at the same lake where it had all begun. Her company had just launched its biggest project, and she'd decided to celebrate not with champagne or headlines, but with the people who had given her life meaning. Jack stood beside her, Sophie between them, holding both their hands. Think you'll ever stop working so hard? Jack teased. Not a chance. She smiled. But now I know what I'm working for. Sophie looked up. What's that? Clara smiled at her, then at Jack. For the people who make it all worth it. They stood there, the waves lapping gently at their feet, the city lights twinkling in the distance. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, it was better. It was real. And as the night settled around them, Clara realized something beautiful. The pain that had once made her beg for help had led her here. To this quiet, steady kind of happiness. Not dramatic, not loud, just right.